Dan Rubenstein, we have finally arrived. Preview season is upon us, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. I like to call this a listener kindly corrects a very small error we make when talking about Maryland's secondary season, that kind of thing. No, this is the best. This is great because we can fully lock in, and we talked about, I don't know if it was on our regular show or one of our Patreon shows, support us for ballers.com, about how we do our best to try to put ourselves in the minds and hearts of fans during the off season. Go back and rewatch things. This is the baggage that a UNLV fan is bringing into the season. This is the baggage that a Texas Tech fan, that an Oregon fan, whatever, is bringing into the season. And so now we can fully say, okay, that was the baggage from last year, the last few years. We've had an off season. We've had everything that is constantly moving within the sport, but we have a good sense of rosters. We have a good sense of, where position battles might be, where strengths, weaknesses might be. It's more difficult in the portal era, but nevertheless, we have a slowly developing idea of how things are coming together for conferences, teams. That said, Ty, as I'm sure you're going to get into. Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. Every conversation you've probably had about college football with what you consider to be the folks out there, Ty,
the good folks
in Eastern PA.
The good folks of Eastern PA, yeah.
It's a lot of it is just constantly catching other people up on, even if they're a fan of Penn State or Notre Dame, catching them up on their own team. I went to a cookout. Buddy Nick is a Wisconsin fan from Wisconsin, went to Wisconsin, and he's like, wait, there's another transfer quarterback coming in from somewhere in Florida. I'm like, that is correct. It's Tyler Van Dyke. And it's Luke Fickell. It is Luke Fickell. And some not super active in the portal, but they're hoping. They lost a couple key players, obviously. Big bruising running back off to the NFL, stuff like that, where you're just like, oh, right, yeah, he's gone. So that all, individual fans are, even if they're not diehard, it's just tough to keep track of sometimes. The comings and goings, who's coming to the conference, where those games are going to be, who has like a crazy schedule. So there is so much to catch up on and get a Cliff's Notes version of that. We're here for it.
Well, we're here for it, and we have to start where I think everybody is starting their conversation right now, to your point of having the conversation at the cookout. I had the same conversation at the cookout. It wasn't specific to a team. It was specific to the sport.
Were you talking about Braylon Allen, though?
Was not talking about Braylon Allen here in Eastern PA.
Okay.
Suffice to say. Big Braylon Allen guy right here. But
of course,
we have to start with all of the new things that have occurred in the offseason, in the build-up to the 2024 season, because things have been building towards this moment for quite some time. And as we talked about on a previous episode, we keep getting these types of questions about all the new things in the sport, and we figured we can't fully launch into conference and team previews without starting with an intro to college football 2024 type episode, a tour guide of sorts for what has changed, what you should expect, how the new playoff, how so much of this stuff is going to work as we go into the new season. This is the most obvious starting point, and we figured we'd put this episode together before we do launch into the more specific stuff, which is going to start up later this week, by the way. We're going to do a 2-part Group of 5 preview. We've never done that before. Unfortunately, and we kind of came to our senses a little bit here in the offseason, we have all too often made the Group of 5 an afterthought. It's been the last preview we've done. We've buzzed through each of the conferences. This year we are starting with the Group of 5, and we're going to give it a 2-part preview episode that spans the end of this week, the start of next. As we get into next week, that's where we're going to flip things on and go to 3 episodes a week. Once we start talking about power conferences, the ACC, the Big 12, obviously the SEC and the Big 10, each of those power conferences are going to get 3 episodes where we can unpack all the storylines, talk through the tiers of each conference, T-I-E-R-S, not T-E-A-R-S.
It could be either, Ty.
Could be either. Depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
We're really going to go full bore here now that it is preview SZN.
Oh, no.
Dan Rubenstein.
I disagree with that. SZN. Yes, everything what you said is correct, and this year, this is the most change that we've seen year over year because of the context of the sport now. And I think it's worth diving into the very new look that college football is going to have.
Absolutely. So here is the deal, one and all. Thank you again for stopping on by, for your support. Hit follow or subscribe wherever it is you get your podcasts. Please make sure you tell your friends that we started up preview mode here. We'd love to have them in our Verballerhood. Leave a review wherever you can. That stuff helps new people find the show. We've gotten a lot of questions about merch. There's got a new merch store that's going to be coming here at some point before the season. So stand pat if you're looking to buy some new Solid Verbal gear. Dan's been working hard on that. We're setting up some stuff. So that'll be that'll be something we take the bubble wrap off here in the coming weeks. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, verballers.com for the super fans among us. Sign up now. We are going to be unveiling some updated Patreon perks again at some point in the next few weeks, but we needed to start here, being so things have turned to July. As we've often said on the show, once we hit July 1, that's kind of the unofficial beginning of the preseason. And we did not want to waste any time. So here we are. We have made it. Welcome to the official preseason.
Yeah, I think Big 12 Media Days start in Macau real soon, right?
Starting in Macau. Is that a Brett Yormark thing?
You gotta do something different. You gotta innovate. Okay, so to you, what is the story? What is the change? What is the thing that people need to understand going into 2024? Realignment, playoff, portal stuff, specific calendar stuff. That's been a big thing lately. Coaching changes. Like where is the headline for you?
I think the headline is conference realignment.
I think so
Would
too.
you agree with that? I mean,
yeah.
Every power conference now has at least 16 teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to count the Pac-12, still exists. Only 2 teams at the Pac-12.
Yep.
Won't include that as part of a power conference preview. We will talk about Oregon State and Washington State, I promise. But Big 12, SEC both have 16 teams. The ACC now has 17 teams. The Big 10 now has 18 teams. In case you were wondering, why are they doing a 3-part power conference preview for all 4 of those? That's why. That would just be too much to get through in an hour. We got to break it up a little bit more than we ever have before. So just to reiterate, the Big 10, of course, is the one that made the most waves. The Big 10 is adding Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. Of note, just because this is more of a business conversation, business side of the sport, Oregon and Washington are taking half revenue shares for some period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, around $30 million per year.
Not bad. Not bad.
No?
But still not the full boat to start anyway. 18 teams in the Big 10. Over in the ACC, we've got Stanford, Cal, who are not getting a full revenue share until they are 10 years into this thing, I believe.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to stand pat for a while with the ACC. SMU is not taking any money for the first 9 years, not even a partial share, but they're going to rely more heavily on donors and whatever they can,
Yeah, they've already raised a ton of money, like $200 million.
Whatever they can kick up among their donor circles. SMU was just chomping at the bit to try and get into a power conference and finally use this as their moment to force their way into the ACC.
And one of the schools, by the way, because the Pac-12 no longer exists, but one of those schools, along with like San Diego State, Fresno State, that the Pac-12, there were conversations and dinners, lunches, brunches with SMU people, with various Mountain West places about, a potential expansion candidate. So they were already targeted by at least what used to be the Pac-12. And because of their location, because of the money, because of, some recent success, some historic success, big name program, attractive to the ACC as they expand their footprint westward and now into a gigantic state of Texas. Yeah.
The SEC is the conference that had these changes the most telegraphed. We knew for a while that Texas and Oklahoma were going to join. For a minute, we weren't sure when. Now we know it's going to be this year when everybody else is switching affiliations. Texas and Oklahoma officially joining the SEC. And last but certainly not least, the Big 12 has added 4 teams, picking the dying corpse of the Pac-12, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah switching affiliations. So again,
right.
SEC, Big 12 both have 16 teams. Get that through your head. The ACC has 17, and the Big 10 is the biggest with 18 teams. So do not be deceived by the numbers and the titles. They are meaningless. It's existing only for branding at this point. But 16, 16, 17, and 18 is what you're looking at in terms of total conference membership.
Yep. I'm more in the Pac-12. That's my view. I'm more in the Pac-12, being from Southern California, going to Oregon. I'm more in the history, the scar tissue, the ups and downs that every single team in the conference, and most recently the addition of and now subtraction of Utah and Colorado as they head to the Big 12. So we sort of did a bonfire episode last year when the news broke in August, I believe, of 2023.
Correct.
Correct. That to me is the headline. Still, the death of a power conference and how fraught and not that, thank you, Ty. Not that it could happen to any of us, but it could happen to you, ACC. It could most certainly happen to you. The other point that I wanted to make about realignment, which is interesting. So in the conversations I have with neighbors and friends or whatever in the Big Ten, I remind them, like, yeah, I'm a fan of a team that's going to be playing around here in this region of the country. And it's weird. And they're like, oh, that's right. Weird. Yeah, that's right. I guess Michigan, Wisconsin, whatever. And there is a history with these four teams, with the Rose Bowl and with scheduling, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA getting the full shares as they made this move a couple years ago. But I think it's also even more so in the SEC, given Texas's history, certainly with Texas A&M, but Mizzou leaving the Big 12, Oklahoma's history, their history with the Southwestern Conference. So this is not, who was it that joined CONCACAF? It was like Qatar or something.
Yeah, Qatar came in on like a one-time invitation basis to play in a tournament.
Yeah, so this is not a situation where programs are fully unaware of each other's existence. So there is already existing scar tissue, but obviously it weakens the Big 12 to lose Texas and Oklahoma from an attention standpoint. And it, geographically makes a lot more sense for Texas and Oklahoma, given how the SEC has expanded recently. Makes zero sense. The clear funniest part of all of this is Cal and Stanford now joining the ACC, which has terrific academic institutions. So there is some fit there, of course, but geographically makes no sense. And Cal and Stanford, for whatever reason, not attractive in the same way to the Big 10 or the Big 12, sort of last minute found their home in the ACC. And now ACC teams that have existed as such will be, ping-ponging across the country. Cal and Stanford, it's a lot more miles for a tennis team or a water polo team to travel than it was going to LA or Pullman or something like that. So that's by far the weirdest, funniest element of all of this. And by far the saddest thing is Washington State and Oregon State being left behind and not being seen on the same level by other conferences like the other 10 teams.
Yeah, still technically in the Pac-12, but
technically in the Pac-12,
the Pac-12
whatever that means,
is dead and gone.
Yeah.
And we will do our part to make sure that Oregon State and Washington State are covered as part of this preview, because despite the fact that they've essentially been left for dead, the football programs still do exist, and they do find themselves in weird territory where they've now got something of an alliance with the Mountain West. They'll play some Mountain West teams. For some period of time, the conference will, quote unquote, still exist. But I think examining what the future of those programs looks like in the short term as well as the long term is something that we can cover as part of our previews. It's interesting, to say the least. If you're a college football fan, you're used to Pac-12 after dark moments. You made videos about them. They went bonkers. People love Pac-12 after dark. Oregon State and Wazoo played a big part in that long storied history of Pac-12 after dark. So we'd be remiss to not at least talk about them in some amount of detail here as we go through all of our previews.
By the way, an insult to injury with regard to Oregon State, despite also being pillaged roster-wise, their coach, a former conquering hero quarterback for the Beavs, Jonathan Smith, who took them from being this terrible situation program a few years ago to this totally respectable perennial bowl, could beat a lot of different teams within the conference type program. He leaves for Michigan State in the opening in East Lansing immediately after Oregon State's season, almost immediately after I think they lose handily to Oregon in their rivalry game. So just sort of kicked when they're down in that regard.
The other thing that we should add here, two other things on the power conference side of things. The structure has changed in all four conferences. They've all ditched divisions. And I feel like this is one of those things that's going to sneak up on a lot of people.
Yeah.
None of them have divisions anymore. So in each case, it will be the top two teams in each league playing for the conference championships. They all have some version of a tiebreaker. They're going to need it. It certainly sets up scenarios in which Ohio State and Michigan could play back-to-back weeks, right? It sets up some interesting possibilities from that standpoint. As we zoom out a little bit, we talk about SMU joining the ACC. Speaking of the AAC, if we switch our focus a little bit now to the group of five, SMU is out of the American. Army is in. Army has joined a conference. They're in the same conference as Navy, which is very intriguing because it's the only conference in America, by my count, that has two strictly option offenses, which could pose, I think, some really interesting body blow theories that we need to unpack as we get into actual game previews and schedule previews and things of that nature. Nobody, thankfully, has to play both Army and Navy on back-to-back weeks. The closest that you get to that is UAB, which has to play, I believe, Navy, followed by Tulane, followed by Army, which is a murderer's row for UAB and their
That's
defense.
tricky. Yep.
But that being said, SMU out of the American, Army is in. It also sets up a very interesting scenario in the American because Army and Navy are going to play their rivalry untouched. Even though they're in the same conference, they're still going to play that rivalry game as a non-conference game, which means that if both Army and Navy at some point in the future, and I promise you it won't be this year, if they finish as the top two teams in the American, it stands to reason they could play for the American title 1 week before essentially an exhibition game against one another in their actual rivalry game.
Yeah. Only in college football.
These are weird things that only exist in college football. But alas, Army is now in the American Conference, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
We also would like to welcome a new team to FBS this year. Kennesaw State becomes the 134th FBS college football team. They are joining up with Conference USA. They are joining a year before Delaware will also join Conference USA starting in the 2025 season. But only one new team this year. We had, I believe, two last year, including Jacksonville State, right? We talked about that. Kennesaw State's the only one this season.
Yes. And it's what, Delaware soon?
Delaware next year, yeah.
Delaware soon. Okay. Blue Hens?
Blue Hens, baby. Let's
Blue
go.
Hens.
What, in your view, is the next biggest storyline?
It's 12-team playoff to me. It's tripling the size of the college football playoff field. It's adding, and you're going to get into, I'm sure, all the new wrinkles of it all, but it's adding home sites to the first round to the playoff and figuring out who does or doesn't get a bye and how it's all going to work. The mechanics and calculus of a 12-team playoff, which we get for all of 2 years?
2 years. 2 years.
2 years.
You get it for 2
teams.
years, then the training wheels come off, then it's officially 14
yes.
teams starting in 2026. Before I dive into the minutia of all this, have you warmed to this new structure at all?
I've warmed to the wrinkles of going on campus, that potentially you'll get like a weird, at some point, Penn State or Wisconsin home game around Christmas. And like, are there going to be like wide swaths of people not there, either because of weather or students being home for winter break or something like that? I somehow doubt it at schools as big as Penn State and Wisconsin and the rabid fan bases that are associated with the Nittany Lions and the Badgers. But this sort of the whole new frontier or whatever of late December round of, 12 or whatever we're going to call it, era playoffs, and what rosters are going to look like, because the full calendar I don't think has been released yet, right? The transfer portal, we don't have that date for December of this year. We have that the recruiting early signing period has been moved up to the week before, or the week of conference championship week. It's like December 4th is when early signing day is. But all the unforeseen wrinkles of having an expanded playoff are interesting to me. The idea of this as like a healthy thing for the sport, not so much. That I have not really warmed up to that as like, this is going to benefit the sport. The like NFL stomping all over part of this schedule is going to be very real. What attendance looks like, what traveling attendance looks like what's the calculus going to be of, are people going to go to a semifinal game? Are they going to go to a quarterfinal game? Are they going to hold out for the championship game? Are they going to try to go to everything? Like, there are going to be elements of this first 12-team playoff that are going to go crazy awry. They're going to be screwy. They're going to be unforeseen things. And that's no different than anything in life when you try out something new.
Sure.
But I'm excited to find out the unforeseen bad things and the unforeseen cool things that I'm not smart enough to see ahead of time. But we will all collectively experience something new for the sport, and that's interesting to me.
What's really interesting to me is, like, we do this year round. We've known that there was going to be an expanded playoff. We have talked about the expanded playoff all offseason. It's not news to us or anybody who's listened to us in the offseason, right? Or anybody who follows college football for the most part. But what I found intriguing was, I'm glad we're doing this episode. I was reading deep in the weeds on how the playoff is going to function, some of how they're trying to or not trying to make it fan friendly. And I learned some new things that I didn't know. And again, we cover it every day.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance here that we should dive into now, right? So it's a 12-team playoff for the first time ever. We had a 4-team playoff for 10 years. They have now expanded it, as you said, threefold. The way this thing is going to work, the top 4 conference champions will be the top 4 seeds and receive a first-round bye. Here is where the first point of confusion is. I want to draw a distinction between seeding in the playoff and the rankings that you watch on TV. The ranking shows that were always meaningless until the last week of the season are effectively even more meaningless now.
Yeah.
Here's the way this is going to work. Again, remember, top 4 conference champions will be the top 4 seeds. So what that means, just as an example here, if Clemson is the number 10 team in the country, let's say they go to the ACC championship and they knock off Florida State, the number 1 team in the country, Florida State. If Clemson wins in an upset and they take the ACC crown, Clemson could end up as, I don't know what, say the number 6 team in the final CFP rankings. But because they are one of the 4 highest ranked conference champions, they would be seeded 4th.
Yeah, they could be 10-3 and be ranked ahead of an undefeated, group of 5 team.
That's right.
Or
that's right.
A 12-1 whoever team.
Exactly. So
from the SEC.
In that example, they would be seeded likely 4th. And they would still get a first round bye. If you're Florida State, if you lose that game, you probably still get in, but you might be the 5th or the 6th or the 7th seed. Still get a home game, but the seeding is going to be different than the rankings. The rankings will matter in the end. And also there is going to be a very real bubble team situation that is worth following and talking about throughout the course of the season. But those ranking shows, I think, bar none, are even more meaningless now than ever before. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would add that I did not know, that I just learned as I was going through and putting this preview together, there's no minimum ranking requirement for a conference champion to qualify. So let's say you are a group of 5 conference champion and you win your conference. There is hell all over college football and madness, and all sorts of lower seeded teams win their conferences. You could find your way to sneak in, even if you're not a top 25 team. The more likely scenario is a team sneaking into, say, the Big 12 title, and maybe they're the 24th ranked team in the CFP. They find a way to win that title. They might be pretty low on the totem pole in terms of final CFP rankings, but they won their conference. They are guaranteed a spot in the playoff. So
not unlike if like a college basketball team is 18-16 and they have a miracle run through Greensboro or whatever in a conference tournament, and suddenly they're in the tournament over a number of teams that are 25-7 or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you win your the easiest way to get into the playoff, to guarantee yourself a shot in the playoff, if you're a power conference team, is to win your conference.
Yeah.
If you're in the G5, in all likelihood, there will be one spot available for you. I'll get into that momentarily. But you got to win your conference. I think it suffice to say, got to win your conference to get in, especially as the SEC and the Big Ten assert more of their will moving forward with this expansion and which teams get in versus which don't.
It largely also, sorry, I'm cutting you off, Ty. Continue your thought.
The final thing that I will add here, because I know there has been some confusion about this, there will inevitably be a lot of confusion about this, maybe as soon as this year, because Notre Dame should be pretty good. Notre Dame can never receive a first-round bye.
Take that, Notre Dame. Okay.
Notre Dame will never receive a first-round bye because they are not in a conference, therefore they cannot win a conference. Regardless of their final ranking, they could finish 12-0, number one team in the country. The highest Notre Dame can ever be seeded in this tournament is 5th. Now, that does not necessarily mean it puts Notre Dame at a disadvantage. And this is something that we have talked about in the offseason. Notre Dame, you can make a case, is in a better position to get that 5 seed if they're, again, one of the top 4 teams in the country, to get the 5 seed, to get a first-round playoff game at home against the number 12 team in the country, presumably the G5 conference champion.
Right.
That game seems like it would be easier than if they played in, say, the Big Ten, and they had to play Ohio State or Oregon or whoever for a conference championship. So you can make the case that they get an easier 13th game by virtue of the new rules here. Even though on the surface it looks like they are being put behind the 8 ball, it really is not the case here. So Notre Dame is included in this. Obviously, they're not going to be lumped in with like G5 teams that are going to have to scrape and claw to win their conference championship to get in. Notre Dame, well, we'll get into conference and team previews here in a few short days and weeks. We can talk more about Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got a very strong case to be part of this and get a home game in year 1 of the expanded playoff.
Yeah.
Are we clear on all of that? Because there's much more here that we need to discuss.
Yeah, and if anybody feels like Notre Dame is getting a raw deal or Notre Dame is getting a sweetheart deal, that they don't have to join a conference, they don't have to win a conference championship to make the playoff, it's Notre Dame playing in a big game in December or January. Exactly. You know how this is going to go.
Exactly.
So just everybody, take a beat. Yeah, I mean, it effectively, I'll say it largely ends the huge emotions surrounding somebody being left out because the opportunities to get in seem to be more varied and vast, right? That you can drop a game and still be in pretty good shape if you're in a power conference.
Correct.
You can drop a couple games and largely still be in pretty good shape, depending on what happens with a conference championship. Obviously, there are factors. I think the big thing, if it's Notre Dame at the 5 seed, if it's whoever at the 5 seed, the big thing where there is going to be emotion, to me, is if we have a situation where, this is just an example, let's say Jalen Milroe misses a couple games, he rolls his ankle, and Alabama doesn't look the same. They finish 9-3, and they're ranked 13 or 14. They're just not the same team with, I guess, Ty Simpson in this example. But when Jalen Milroe is healthy, they're beating everybody by 28. And so they're ranked 13 or 14, and you're like, well, they're clearly way better, and the situation is such where everybody knows they're way better than their record because of a quarterback injury. That's when you'll start getting into some of the emotion of should they or shouldn't they, or they were left out unjustly. But short of that, and that's football, right? Injuries are part of football, and there are situations where a team looks way different and way better, after September, and clearly one of the 12 best teams in the country, even though their record doesn't necessarily indicate it. That said, I don't think those cases are going to be happen crazy often, but I still think we're going to see some emotional situations in that 12, 13, 14 range, but not to the same magnitude that we've seen, not often with the best 4 teams, but that we've certainly seen, as we've neared the end of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, a Florida State situation from last year no longer happens.
But rare. But that's kind of rare anyway.
It's kind of rare, but situations like that, which are always heartbreaking, doesn't matter who you root for. Unless you root for the rival, right? We're trying to play this thing as neutral as we can. The Florida State thing last year with Jordan Travis was heartbreaking. And everybody was in an impossible situation, and it's most deserving versus best team. And we have these conversations year in and year out. Yeah. And I just think that shifts now to the to the lower side of the spectrum, right? With
Yeah.
respect to who's ranked and who isn't. And the bubble team economy is something that I think we'll see something of a boom here. The deeper we get into the season, I hope it keeps interest around a little bit longer as teams wait to find out if they're going to have a shot at the playoff or not. I think it will make things certainly more discussion worthy down the stretch. We're not just talking about 4 teams. Now we're talking about 12. Here is where it gets a little bit interesting, though. All right. So we talked about the 4 highest ranked conference champions getting a bye. The other 8 teams are going to play first round games, quote, at the site of the higher seeded school or at a different site determined by the higher seeding school, end quote. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be played on campus. They're giving some of these schools a bit of an out because we know, especially at some places in like the upper Midwest, et cetera, they may not have the ability to play a game in December.
They're logistic stuff. Yeah.
Logistical things. I think they're trying to work those out as best they can. I know schools like Penn State and Wisconsin and others, especially in the Big Ten, have made investment to winterize stadiums and whatnot. But there's at least language in here that if you can't play at the stadium, you still get to host the game, but you get to pick where you host it, which is interesting.
Right.
One of those 8 spots is reserved for the highest ranked Group of 5 champion. You got to win your conference. You got to be the highest ranked Group of 5 conference champion. This makes for a very interesting conversation, Dan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that also then that's where emotion can come from come Thanksgiving.
And I think that is one of the bright spots that has been overlooked as we have talked about this new setup. And, we just had a conversation about, well, how do fans of Group of 5 schools feel about this new setup? Do they feel like they're just being thrown a bone and nobody seriously wants them to be part of it? Do they feel like they are actually being included in this sport moving forward? Like, there are 2 trains of thought there that are interesting to unpack. But I do think that this will be very, very, very hotly contested as we get into the latter part of November. Which G5 team is for you, right? There is a case to be made that Liberty could go 13-0 in their conference. Liberty obviously playing the Fiesta Bowl last year against Oregon, got murdered. Right. Does being your conference champion, being undefeated, necessarily mean that you are going to get a spot in this playoff? Stands to reason that it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. Not all of these conferences are created equal. They don't play defense in the Sun Belt the way they might play it in, say, the American or the Mountain West.
Sure.
So the committee is going to have some pointed conversations, I would expect, over who gets in and who doesn't. That, I think, is where we're going to see the most drama. Not so much with who's number 12 among the power conference teams, but who is number 1 among the G5 conference champions. That will be, I think, really, really fascinating to try and follow.
That said, which I think is all correct, if you're super into conference PR representatives and mouthpieces of de facto mouthpieces, even though they're not technically paid to be such, to sort of extol the virtues of the SEC, to extol the virtues of the Big Ten, because when you get into it, it's going to be a lot of the at-large teams coming from the power, all of the at-large teams coming from the power conferences, and then from a more granular level, is you're going to be comparing a 10-2 SEC team against a 10-2 ACC team against 10-2 Big 12 team, whatever. And we are going to get into conference strength or perceived conference strength and schedules. And like that is going to be filling your November, right? That sort of PR blitz of like, how do you leave a 10-2 SEC team? How do you leave a 10-2 Big 10 team off? How do you leave it's the SEC? It's the Big 10. That is going to be the conversation.
Oh yeah. And I think
it's
also
gonna be so bad.
Yeah. It also paves the way for some strategy moving forward.
Yeah. Scheduling strategy. Sure.
Not just scheduling, but almost looking at conference membership as a whole on the G5 level. And if you are a school, I'll use Liberty as an example. Like, Liberty is going to go through Conference USA. Conference USA is not going to offer much resistance. They're just not.
Right.
Could that affect Liberty?
Hell, Arkansas didn't offer much resistance to Liberty a couple of years ago.
No. But like, could we find ourselves in a situation down the road where the committee looks at a conference champion, they say that's a weak conference, and as a result, then those in charge of the conference have to try and beef it up. They have to try and add better teams to create a better conference and hopefully put whoever their conference champion is in a better position to actually make this next round. I just think there's a lot here with this G5 spot that is going to work itself out in real time and make for some great takes and truly awful takes. And I am signed up for both of them. I think it'll be fascinating. I'm just glad that they're included. I am glad that a G5 team is going to be part of this. The other thing that I should add, as we've started to add rounds and add teams to this playoff, it's now going to be possible for a team to play 17 games in a season.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. If a team loses its conference championship game and then has to play 4 playoff games, could at a point get to a situation where you've got 17 games in a season for somebody, which would be unprecedented.
Yeah.
So the possibility exists for that. Don't be surprised if you look at a record and the winner this coming season is 16 games.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I mean, I think we're going to get to the point where we're seeing a number of teams playing more games where we will again have a conversation about the usefulness of a conference championship game beyond ad revenue. And I know TV is in charge of the sport, so TV is the ones that's going to make this decision. But at least that conversation will continue or start up anew. We're just like, why don't we just put the best 12 or 14 teams in and include a spot for the best G5, the highest ranked G5 champion or whatever. But otherwise, and that's, definitely from like the SEC and Big Ten's prerogative, like to get the most number of their teams in as the 2 biggest conferences with the most teams who get the most attention. That certainly seems like a big deal for them. But yeah, that's going to be another thing as we get away from divisions and we have tiebreakers, and it's just, you give everybody a bye week between the end of the regular season and the start of both bowl season and playoff season. And it's also early signing day. It's also potentially transfer portal time. Like, we're going to have that conversation eventually.
The other interesting tidbit about this playoff.
Yeah.
When are the games? When are they playing these games?
Yeah.
Basically, it starts when you're used to bowl season starting, and then there is a new round every 10 days. Okay?
Book your vacations accordingly.
All right, so the first round of games this year start up on Friday, December the 20th. There's one game that Friday night. And then the next day, December the 22nd, there are 3 on that Saturday. Interesting point here. There are only 3 games throughout this entire tournament being played on a weekend. They are doing this presumably to try and hopscotch around the NFL schedule.
Yeah.
The NFL ain't budging. They have no reason to.
No.
Which means that outside of that first round, when we've got those 3 games on that Saturday, December the 21st, you've got one game that's being played on New Year's Eve. You've got 3 games that are being played on New Year's Day, a Tuesday and a Wednesday this year. Playing games on New Year's Day is fine. We're used to that as college football fans. The semifinals are played on a Thursday and a Friday, and the national championship is played on a Monday. So truly, they're playing games during the week. They're going to use the holiday to their advantage wherever they can. It'll be interesting to see what happens to this moving forward. To your point of attendance, I'm curious to see what TV viewership looks like, because we know that is so much of what's been driving this.
Sure.
The other thing that I would add, and this is one of the bones that I have to pick with this whole setup, and maybe the later part of this conversation, we could talk about some of the new broadcasting affiliations, but you might have read about ESPN sub-licensing some of their games to TNT.
Saw that.
Okay. The way this is going to work, and it's going to start up this year, TNT is going to host 2 of those games on Saturday. I have made the case now for 2 years that interest in the first round of this new playoff will be at a fever pitch. just because they're going to be games on campus. I've never seen that before. So emotion, passion, the pageantry of playing these games on campus for the first time ever, it's going to be off the charts. If we are truly viewing this through the lens of they're trying to make this a TV show, they're trying to make this the best fan experience possible, they're trying to get everyone all ginned up for this new playoff. Why is ESPN giving the games, 2 of these games, to a network that basically does not carry college football most of the year? Different announcers, it'll feel different. The ambiance, the vibe, everything about it will be different for presumably 2 of the biggest games on the calendar. That to me seems like an enormous misstep. Maybe they're trying to make some of their money back. Maybe,
I think that's what it is. I think they paid a premium to get the college football playoff and not have it go to Fox, and they're trying to get some money.
Like, I get that they're trying to recoup some of the investment. I know they paid a pretty penny, ESPN did, to get these playoffs. But it seems like a huge miss. And honestly,
which are the 2 games? Do we know?
It's 2 of the games on Saturday.
Okay, so do we think it's because those are the games that are going to get potentially crushed by NFL games?
I have no idea. And maybe that's what they're thinking is too.
Yeah.
But it seems like an enormous bummer to me that 2 of what will easily be the most anticipated games this year, truly, I'm not exaggerating, in the history of college football, ESPN, who sees itself as like the mothership of all things sports, not the least of which is college football, they're punting those 2 games over to TNT. Different announcers, different vibe. It's going to feel different for the home
viewer. Do we
get
Kevin Harlan back in college football?
I think we might get Kevin Harlan back, which I'm pro. Okay.
Yeah, we like Kevin Harlan.
Love Kevin Harlan.
I watched an old clip. He called like the 1993 Copper Bowl. Yeah.
Great. I would love Kevin Harlan. That'd be terrific.
Yeah,
all right.
He's great.
And certainly there are plenty of good announcers. I'm not like, crapping on announcers here. But it just seems odd to me that if ESPN and Fox are driving this whole thing, we're going to get to this brand new expanded playoff that everybody's excited about. No, the games are on TNT. Great.
Right.
Seems odd, right? Seems odd to me. Maybe to you. I don't know. The way they're working these rounds, again, the first 4 games are going to be.
Remember, TNT has money to spend, right? They're losing the NBA.
They're losing the NBA. They got to spend it on something.
They spent it on, so far, sub-licensing the college football playoff, and I saw that they're getting the French Open. It's like a TNT and like Max situation. So they're getting I'm sure they'll be aggressive with sports rights moving forward even more. Yeah.
First 4 games on campus. The quarterfinals, which is the next round, it's going to be played at the site of the Peach, Rose, and Sugar Bowls.
Okay.
And there's another one here that I didn't write down.
And they maintained January 1st afternoon, evening for the Rose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They kept that structure in place. Those games, those 3 games, the Peach, Rose, and Sugar, are going to be played on New Year's Day. And the 2 semifinal games will be at the Orange and Cotton Bowl, then the CFP National Championship. They're going to play that one Monday, the 20th of January, as the season creeps out a little bit more, playing that one at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So if you're down in Hotlanta, that's where your championship will be this season.
Need like a laminated card that people can put in their wallets or just in front of their toilets to just always remind themselves. That's what we need. Continue.
We need the magnet that I was joking with you
I
about.
know. We do need a magnet.
We need a refrigerator magnet for new conference affiliation, for the playoff schedule, for some of these new rules. So
we'll just set up an app, and the only thing the app does is give you like a 48-hour push alert that there is yet another college football playoff game about to happen that you can attend, watch, wager on, whatever your choice. Yeah.
The other thing that's changing this year, I speak of different vibes, is we have some new broadcasting affiliations this year.
That's true. Speaking of TNT, yeah.
Right. So TNT is going to get 2 of those first round college football playoff games. They're also going to have 14 Mountain West games on their air this year.
Yeah.
ESPN gets the SEC. No more CBS.
Yep. I know. So it'll be ABC. It's be ESPN on ABC airing that 3:30 game Eastern, right?
So the combination of ESPN and ABC is still going to have the majority of the big games. They'll have ACC, they'll have SEC, they'll have some Big 12, in addition to the American, the MAC, Conference USA, and the Sun Belt. All right. They still have the biggest package of games. So if you're used to watching games on ESPN and ABC, that's not going anywhere. Fox, obviously in bed with the Big 10, going to have whatever Big 12 games are left. They will also have Mountain West games.
Yeah.
CBS is the one that is changing the most, in my view, right? CBS is going to have more Big Ten games this year. They're going to have Mountain West games this year. They're still going to continue to cover that Army versus Navy game. But if you're used to watching the SEC on CBS, you're in for a rude awakening. That's no longer going to be the case. So presumably Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson are going to be working some Big Ten games this coming season. It's a different vibe. Look, we've been used to this for a good long time now. That is changing. NBC going to continue broadcasting Big Ten games. They're also going to have Notre Dame as well. The Notre Dame
home
booth
games,
is changing. We can talk about that a little bit more when we get to Notre Dame. And the only other network that I will mention here is that...
Is it another Collinsworth kid doing the Notre Dame games?
There are no more.
Is it Hank Collinsworth?
There are no more Collinsworths in the booth. Collinsworthi, whatever the plural is there. And the CW still getting, I believe, 13 ACC games this year, in addition to the Pac-12. So if you want to watch Oregon State and Wazoo, the CW is for you.
Start looking up your local listings if you're traditional cable or over the air, or whatever your streaming service of choice is. Be on the lookout for the CW or TNT. And by the way, there's also Peacock is doing NBC affiliated Big Ten games.
Yeah, I tried not to mention we'll just lump Peacock in with NBC, but that was a bit of a sticking point for folks last year. I mean, it's been a trend. Not just with college football. We've seen it with all sorts of pro sports now where they put something streaming exclusive. It sucks. Yep. I hate it. It's purely a money grab. There will inevitably be games like that this year that are only on Peacock. As we get through previewing schedules and talking through individual weeks and whatnot, we can, bring that up when it comes to pass. But
you don't want your data harvested and get advertisements specific, like, hey, we saw you ordered chocolate-covered almonds, Ty. Man. Here's a bunch of chocolate-covered almond commercials during your Peacock game, Ty.
Some of the Peacock commercials I've been seeing as of late are off the wall. Definitely not tailored for me.
Oh, okay, good.
So I don't know what they're doing with my data, but maybe they should do more with it.
Should also note that because of the streaming stuff, because of how many games are happening and the windows that we have, both in terms of late night Saturday windows for both, ACC, Big 12, Big 10 with West Coast teams. We're also seeing more games being pushed to Friday.
Correct.
I think Oregon has a couple Friday games. I saw Clemson decided to tell the ACC, now we're good. When they were told they're going to play on Friday, they sent them an official letter of we have determined we're not going to do this. I didn't know you could say no. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's going well in the ACC. So there's going to be more streaming, more varied schedules, and that's just the reality in which we live.
The final bit, I think, of reintroduction to the verballerhood for the 2024 college football season. Coaching and player movement.
Yes.
Outside of the big structural stuff that's changing, like the playoffs and who's covering them and who's in which conference, the thing that most people are going to start talking about before long, new coaches, transfers, actual on-field stuff, which is mostly what we care about here on the show. This was certainly an eventful offseason in that regard. The biggest of which was Nick Saban retiring. We had joked for, honestly, how many years? 5, 6, 7 years about we need to pre-record our reaction to Nick Saban retiring. Yeah. We knew it was going to happen at some point. We didn't know when. It snuck up on us. So Nick Saban's out. Kalen DeBoer from Washington is in. Jedd Fisch takes over at Washington. Brent Brennan takes over at Arizona. Ken Niumatalolo, not running the option, takes over at San Jose State. So you follow that chain the whole way down from Saban to Ken Niumatalolo. Texas A&M got rid of Jimbo, bringing in Mike Elko. Duke is replacing Elko with Manny Diaz, left Penn State. Penn State backfilled the defensive coordinator position with Tom Allen, who left Indiana. Indiana got Curt Cignetti from James Madison. If everybody can follow these things. I'm not doing all the coaches, just doing some of the primary ones that I know people care about. Both Michigan schools. Jim Harbaugh, obviously the Mel Tucker thing. We knew about that for a while. 2 new coaches in the state of Michigan. Sherrone Moore taking over full-time now for Harbaugh as he leaves to go back to the NFL. And Jonathan Smith, the aforementioned Jonathan Smith, the savior of Oregon State football, has decided, let's go to East Lansing. And then to close things out, we had Jeff Lebby taking over at Mississippi State for Zach Arnett. Fran Brown, our boy, Fran Brown, who we love.
Guy, yeah.
Like a brother, taking over for Dino Babers at Syracuse.
Sure.
And Deshaun Foster taking over at UCLA after Chip Kelly decided, I'd rather just be an offensive coordinator for Ohio State.
Yeah, and not the only one, not the only head coach that decided on a new coordinator path for whatever reason. Chip Kelly, I think, just wants to be coach football. Jeff Hafley at Boston College becomes the new defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers in the NFL. By the way, you said you didn't want to follow the chain completely. You stopped the chain immediately when a Patriot League head coach got to take over James Madison, Bob Chesney, Holy Cross.
That's right.
And you didn't mention, I think Richmond is joining the Patriot League.
That's right.
So we have to come up with a whole new angle.
We got to come up
for
with a
Richmond
whole new
football for the
angle
Spiders.
Now. Are you into spiders?
Yeah. So yes, there are new coaches everywhere, and obviously the timing of, especially as the calendar gets extended. So Nick Saban announces he's leaving Alabama shortly after Alabama's loss in the playoff, which then Washington's head coach Kalen DeBoer announces he's leaving shortly after their appearance in the national championship game. And Jedd, it's now so far removed from when the portal opens, from early signing day, that it throws a lot into the air in terms of already an environment of a ton of player movement and coaching movement. They all need to hire new coordinators. They're moving families. They're recruiting guys from their old roster. A prime example of all of this is the guys who left Alabama, and that's a number of talented dudes who could go anywhere they wanted for a number of these guys. Not the least of which was Julian Sayin, who was 5-star quarterback, decides is committed to Nick Saban in Alabama forever from Southern California. He's now at Ohio State, which I guess he views as a more stable landing spot. And didn't go through spring or anything to see Kalen DeBoer's offense if there were a fit with him. So, that's just going to be that new reality that you really don't know what you have until, your team kicks off to start the year.
The other three teams that I will call out quickly, and again, I'm not going to do all of these coaches. I'd be here all day.
Yeah.
Willie Fritz taking over for Dana Holgorsen at Houston.
Yeah.
So Willie Fritz now getting a bite at the Big 12 apple.
Mm-hmm.
John Sumrall, who I think we all love.
Yeah, he's really good.
Younger guy taking over at Tulane for Willie Fritz. And Jared Parker, the beloved Jared Parker, former Notre Dame offensive coordinator, somehow got the Troy job to take over for John Sumrall. Was a former teammate of John Sumrall's, I believe, when they were both at Kentucky.
Okay.
So there's some familiarity with John Sumrall, but if you're familiar at all with Jared Parker and his work with the Notre Dame offense, maybe some reason to be skeptical about the Troy Trojans this coming year.
Which, by the way, Notre Dame, that's not a Notre Dame show. Not intentionally, anyway. I think they finished like a top 20 national offense last year. Like, this wasn't a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe
from a number standpoint,
for you.
Yes. From a number standpoint, yes.
In bigger games, I understand your frustration.
You watched the games.
The ceiling, yes.
They were very predictable.
Yeah.
And a lot of those numbers came against teams that they should have come against, but not in the biggest spots. They were,
I agree,
way too predictable against teams like Ohio State, against teams like Clemson. Even a game like Ohio State, which they, could have won. So I'd like to see some more varied play calling, which hopefully we'll get this year with Mike Denbrock. But there's a time and place to have that conversation.
You want to hear some new teams that are going to have new starting quarterbacks via the portal? It's not a dusting, Ty. Oregon, Michigan State, Miami, Kentucky, Duke, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Florida State, probably Boise State, Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Vanderbilt, possibly USC. Like, it's big places.
We need the flashcards, man. We need the flashcards.
We need the Animaniacs song. We need flashcards. We need it all. Dylan Gabriel goes from Oklahoma to Oregon. I mentioned Julian Sayin, Aiden Childs, Oregon State to Michigan State. Brock Vandegrift, a backup at Georgia, is now the presumed starter at Kentucky. Like, it is all over the place that there are, I think, a limited number of obvious game changers. Cam Ward, Washington State, Miami, certainly a big one, and that was an extended decision.
Yep.
It seems that the place you can have the biggest jump in pop still, unless you're Clemson, is wide receiver. that the wide receiver market in terms of higher level talent, whether it's Juice Wells at Ole Miss, Colby Young going from Miami to Georgia, Evan Stewart, Texas A&M to Oregon, you name it, that you can give yourself instant pop offensively with the number of receivers in the portal who are either unproven but thought of highly coming out of high school or flashed as a freshman but have been injured, that is a place. There's a lot of DBs in the portal, but in terms of interesting pop, receiver seems to be the place right now with the most upside.
Yeah, you can get a lot at receiver. Quarterback, I think, is still a coin flip. You can also get a lot up front on defense. We have seen some edge rushers. I mean, look at what Jedd Fisch did when he came down from Albany to Florida State, ended up a first-round draft pick. So you mentioned some of the quarterbacks. Look, I'm not going to list them off. You didn't mention Riley Leonard, who comes over to Notre Dame from Duke.
I said Notre Dame would have a new starter.
Big one.
Yeah.
You didn't mention Will Howard at all.
No, I said Ohio State. I said he was on my
Julian
list of teams.
Don't overlook my boy Will Howard.
I said Ohio State would have a new starter. Yeah.
So Ohio State was very active in the portal. They didn't take a ton of transfers, but they took enough high-level talent to, I think, be interesting. Quinshawn Judkins comes over to Ohio State at the running back position from Ole Miss. There were a bunch of bigger-name running backs that were also on the move. Damian Martinez is really good. Came to Miami from Oregon State. He is also fleeing the Oregon State situation. Trevor Etienne leaves Florida to go to Georgia. Dylan Edwards leaves Colorado. Remember him at Colorado last year? He was a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
He's going back home to Kansas State. Even a guy like a Jordan Waters at Duke, who was really productive, going now to NC State, I think gives them a little bit more pop on offense. NC State, by the way, also got Noah Rogers from Ohio State, who figures to step in right away and give them some pop at the receiver position. Who else do we need? Deion Burks is another big name, Purdue.
Julian Fleming, Ohio State to Penn State is a big deal.
Julian Fleming, yeah. So there are guys kind of dotted throughout offenses around the country. There are too many defensive players to list, but the biggest of which, of course, is Walter Nolan, who left Texas A&M to go to Ole Miss.
I would say Caleb Downs and Walter Nolan were probably
Caleb Downs,
1A, 1B, from Alabama to Ohio State. Just the clear best young defensive player, freshman defensive player in the country to me, making that move to Ohio State. That essentially when you look at young star power from last season, he probably, I'm sure I'm missing out on some players, but he is in that group of where you're just like, man, if he hit the open market, what does that look like? Yeah. And now we know it's Ohio State. Yeah.
And another Colorado guy leaving, a well-known Colorado player, Cormani McClain. It was a big deal when he signed with Deion.
Yeah. Didn't play.
Any
appreciable time. Yeah.
Didn't play. Deion slung some arrows at him, indicating that he wasn't mature enough to be out there on the field. Cormani McClain says, I'm going to Florida. So he is now leaving.
Yeah. But a weird sort of portal situation where I think he was looking at UCF. No shade at UCF, who I like a lot, but it wasn't the attention he was getting as a portal player wasn't the same as the attention he was getting as a high school senior.
Okay, Dan. I think that is as close to a crash course as we're going to get here to start things off here in preview season for the 2024 college football season. There is a lot yet to come. As we said at the top, up next is a two-part group of 5 preview. We're going to talk through all those teams as best we can. Then we're going to have 3-part previews coming for each of the power conferences, starting with the ACC. Next week, we will flip over to 3 episodes a week, so make sure that you update your podcast feeds. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe that you don't miss any of our episodes. Of course, tell your friends, write reviews, whatever you can do to help spread the goodness here of the Solid Verbal. Much appreciated. Of course, verballers.com is where you can go for the ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord access, and much of what is to come with our games, with all the in-season festivities that are coming down the pike. We will get to that here in due course, but still a little early as it's only middle to early July.
Yeah. It's going to be a wild year. I have no idea what to expect. It's going to be a wild year. I'm sure both of us hope to be in Atlanta for the national championship game because Notre Dame is there, because Oregon's there, because would you believe it? Notre Dame is taking on Oregon for the 2024 national championship.
That would be the Solid Verbal in the inaugural championship of the 12-teamer would be something.
I mean, we could get 2 teams playing 3 times this year, right? We could get Oregon, Ohio State. We could get Texas, LSU, any sort of combination in the SEC of the power teams. Georgia, Texas playing a number of times. And that's just the new reality in which we live. But yeah, it ends in Atlanta. It was Oregon, Ohio State in the inaugural 4-team college football playoff 2014 season. So will be fascinating. I cannot recommend enough 2 things. Go and just look up who's on your team if you haven't been paying attention this year, if you're just sort of getting back into the swing of the sport, because it's probably looking a lot different. Look at your coaching staff, look at your team, look at your schedule, all that, and subscribe to the Solid Verbal for
absolutely
3 episodes a week starting very soon.
Absolutely. All right. So look, as we said a couple times now, previews begin in earnest with our next episode. This was your welcome back episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We're going to do our part to talk through these conferences, what's new in these conferences, the storylines that you need to follow, and of course, the teams that we like and don't like, and why you should or shouldn't like them as well. We will do our part here to get you prepped and ready to go. But
yes,
it's here, man. We made it.
It's here. I need bigger TVs. That's what I've determined. I keep seeing how cheap TVs are. Got to go 75. That's all.
Prime Day's next week, man.
Is that true? Oh, okay.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein. For myself, Ty Hildebrandt. Welcome back to the 2024 college football season. We'll talk to you in a few days. Stay solid.
Peace. Also, Northwestern is playing on a lacrosse field. That's a new thing that we should have mentioned. Northwestern is playing on a lacrosse field with temporary bleachers, 11.5 feet from a very windy, cold lake.
We should have included that. We should have included that.
Oh, well.